The airport hummed with its familiar orchestra, rolling suitcases, the echo of hurried footsteps, boarding announcements layered over one another, and the constant murmur of tired travelers. For most, this was just another day, another trip, another crossing between cities that blurred together over time. For some, it was a long-anticipated journey home. For others, the beginning of something new. At gate C-27, the flight to New York was boarding right on time, an unusual blessing. For passengers used to delays, the boarding line crept forward, a slow-moving parade of different lives converging on the same destination. A businessman clutched his phone tightly against his ear, nodding as if his client could see the gestures. Behind him, a mother crouched, down to comfort her daughter, who clung to a stuffed rabbit with fur worn thin from love. Further back, two college students debated which pizza place they would hit first when they landed. Each one carried a story, a purpose, yet inside the airplane, those stories would briefly share the same stage. She appeared almost unnoticed in the crowd, a young woman with tired eyes and a soft, worn backpack slung over her shoulder. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her presence, nothing that demanded attention. And perhaps that was what made her later role all the more haunting. She moved with quiet efficiency, scanning her boarding pass, offering a polite smile to the attendant, and stepping into the jet bridge with the kind of practiced ease of someone who had flown many times before. Her seat, 11A, waited near the wing, an unassuming corner where she would tuck herself away from the bustle of the flight. Inside the cabin, the air carried that familiar mix of recycled oxygen and faint coffee. Overhead bins thudded as passengers hoisted luggage, some with practiced swiftness, others fumbling and apologizing. Flight attendants greeted each traveler with smiles that masked their fatigue. Their polished appearance, the neatly tied scarves, pressed uniforms, and bright lipstick was part of the illusion that flying was always calm, always safe, always routine. The woman in 11A placed her backpack beneath the seat, slid into her chair, and gazed out the window at the tarmac. She tucked a blanket over herself, plugged in her headphones, and before the boarding process was even complete, her head tilted gently against the window. Sleep claimed her quickly, as if she had been waiting for the quiet hum of the engines to lull her into another world. Around her, the scene unfolded like a living mural. The businessman in 10C continued typing furiously, his fingers hammering the keys of his laptop with an urgency that suggested the world would crumble if he slowed. The mother in 12B read a picture book aloud, her voice calm, despite her daughter's restless squirming. 2 rows behind, laughter erupted from the college students, their voices a little too loud, earning sharp glances from other passengers, trying to preserve their quiet. Each life pressed forward, colliding within this floating capsule, unaware of how fleeting their control would soon feel. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, steady and reassuring. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Flight 237, service from Denver to New York. We're expecting a smooth ride tonight with clear skies most of the way. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you on the ground in just under 4 hours." His words wrapped the cabin in comfort. Passengers nodded, some sighed with relief. It was a promise of normalcy, of safety. Few questioned it, fewer doubted it. As the aircraft taxied, the lights inside dimmed slightly, casting a warm glow across faces. Seatbelts clicked into place, trays snapped shut, and phones switched into airplane mode. Children pressed their noses against windows, marveling at the giant wings outside. For many, this moment was exciting, magical even. But for seasoned travelers, it was mechanical, just another chapter in the book of their daily grind. The engines roared, a deep vibration that filled the cabin, rattling armrests and sending drinks in cup holders quivering. The woman in 11A stirred briefly, shifting her blanket higher, but she did not wake. Her breathing slowed, steady and deep, as though the sound of takeoff was nothing more than a lullaby. The plane lifted, the world outside tilting as the city shrank beneath them, its lights forming glowing webs that glittered against the dark earth. Once at cruising altitude, the cabin came alive in its quiet rituals. Overhead lights clicked, on one by one like tiny stars, as passengers opened books, flipped through magazines, or powered up laptops. The aroma of coffee drifted from the galley as attendants prepared carts, their cheerful chatter carrying softly through the aisle. Strangers exchanged polite words, others withdrew into their own worlds, earbuds sealing them off from reality. Row 11 existed in its own little pocket of stillness. The businessman leaned back, massaging his temples, clearly battling exhaustion. The mother's daughter finally drifted off to sleep against her arm, the stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. And the woman in 1-1, slept so peacefully that it seemed almost unreal, her head resting lightly against the cool window, her features softened by dreams. The flight attendants rolled their carts down the aisle, offering sodas, pretzels, and the occasional small bottle of wine. Passengers accepted eagerly, grateful for small comforts. The businessman requested black coffee, the mother whispered for apple juice, the students ordered beers. When the attendant reached row 11, she leaned closer to the sleeping woman, then decided against waking her, sliding the cart forward without a sound. For a time, it seemed nothing could disturb the serenity of the flight. The cabin glowed with a quiet rhythm, the flicker of seatbelt signs, the hum of engines, the occasional click of a pen. But every journey carries its unseen variables, the hidden forces that shift without notice. Somewhere in the cockpit, a light blinked, small, insignificant perhaps, but not ignored. The captain glanced at it, then at his co-pilot. Neither spoke of it yet. For now, passengers continued to sip sodas, laugh at movies, and drift into naps. In 1-1A, she remained still, oblivious, as if her body knew this sleep was not just ordinary rest, but insulation from what was to come. Her stillness drew subtle attention. The man beside her wondered briefly how she could remain asleep through takeoff, turbulence, and chatter. He envied her calm, her detachment. Little did he know that very detachment would later haunt the memories of every passenger who lived through what was ahead. The hours stretched, uneventful on the surface. The city lights below faded, swallowed by stretches of darkness as the aircraft crossed over plains and forests invisible in the night. Clouds rolled in like ghostly blankets, surrounding the aircraft in a soft cocoon. Occasionally, the plane dipped slightly, enough to cause a ripple of nervous glances, but not enough to alarm. The captain's earlier promise of smooth skies seemed intact. Yet, tension has a way of planting seeds even in the most ordinary moments. The businessman, distracted from his screen, caught himself staring at the no smoking sign that flickered faintly before stabilizing. A flight attendant exchanged a quick look with her colleague when she thought no one was watching. A man across the aisle pressed his call button twice before shaking his head and retracting it. Small things, barely noticeable. But when pieced together, they whispered of something beneath the surface. And still, in 1-1A, she slept. The blanket rose and fell with her breathing, headphones dangling loose around her neck. To anyone passing by, she looked like the embodiment of calma, strange anchor in the middle of a machine hurtling through the night sky. No one knew then that her slumber would become part of the story itself, the quiet center of a storm none of them yet realized was forming. For now, Flight 237 carried on like thousands before it. Routine, ordinary, safe, or so everyone believed. The cabin of Flight 237 glowed with a muted warmth, the kind of ambience designed to lull passengers into comfort. Overhead lights flickered on in small clusters, some passengers keeping them bright for reading, while others preferred the dim shadows for rest. It was a snapshot of ordinary air travel. The hum of engines, the occasional ding of a seatbelt sign, and the quiet buzz of dozens of lives sharing the same space for a few fleeting hours. For those on board, this was the calm part of the journey, the part where time seemed to stretch and fold in on itself. Some passengers leaned back with earbuds, their heads swaying to private playlists, while others tapped away at laptops, determined to finish work before the plane touched down. A young boy giggled at an animated film on the screen in front of him, his laughter bubbling out like a bright spark in the otherwise subdued atmosphere. Even the nervous flyers, who had gripped their armrests during takeoff, now seemed to relax, their bodies settling into the rhythm of steady flight. Flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisle, their carts stocked with drinks and small snacks. Their smiles were practiced, yet genuine enough to soothe even the most restless passengers. They leaned low to offer juice boxes to children, poured steaming coffee into paper cups, and exchanged light-hearted jokes with frequent travelers. The sound of clinking ice against plastic cups punctuated the air like tiny bells. At row 11, tranquility reigned. The businessman in 10C finally closed his laptop, sighing with relief as if surrendering to the enforced stillness of flight. Mother in 12B tucked her daughter's blanket more tightly around her small shoulders, whispering something soft before brushing hair away from her child's face. And in the middle of it all, in 11A, she remained asleep, her head gently resting against the window, her lips parted in a dreamless slumber. The dim glow of the cabin lights gave her features an almost ethereal quality, as though she were a painting caught in a moment of serenity. But beyond the cabin curtain, behind the heavy, locked door of the cockpit, the atmosphere was different. There, calm was a mask stretched thin across growing unease. The captain sat upright, his hands steady on the controls, but his eyes betrayed a sharp focus that went beyond routine. A warning light on the instrument panel had flickered minutes ago, faint and brief, but enough to catch his attention. At first, he had dismissed it as a minor irregularity. Aircraft were filled with sensors, and not all anomalies spelled disaster. But when the same light blinked again, this time with a stubborn persistence, he leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice low but edged with tension. The co-pilot glanced over, adjusting his headset. His eyes followed the captain's finger to the panel. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Could be a sensor error. Let me run." A check. His hands moved quickly, flipping switches, scrolling through the digital displays. Numbers rolled across the screens: altitude, fuel consumption, pressure levels. At first glance, everything seemed within range, but the captain knew better than to trust appearances. Flying wasn't about ignoring the little things. It was about respecting them. "Let's monitor it," the captain said. His tone was calm, almost casual, but his jaw tightened as he spoke. The co-pilot nodded, though he, too, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Both men knew the truth. Airplanes didn't often lie, and when they did, the consequences of ignoring them could be catastrophic. Back in the cabin, the flight attendant's routine carried on without interruption. Passengers accepted cups of cola and packets of pretzels, thanked the attendants with polite smiles, and returned to their distractions. The cabin was alive with little rituals of comfort. A man flipped through a dog-eared novel. A woman whispered into her phone on airplane mode, recording a message to send when she landed. A teenager tapped at a handheld game console, the sound of rapid clicks faint but insistent. The woman in 11A shifted slightly, her blanket sliding down her shoulder. She breathed deeply, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of someone lost in deep sleep. To the other passengers, she was barely noticed. To those who sat near her, she became almost a source of envy, someone capable of surrendering to such peaceful rest, while they themselves remained restless. But as calm as the cabin appeared, subtle cracks were forming. The first sign came in the form of turbulence. It wasn't much a gentle shudder, like a car hitting a small pothole, but it was enough to draw startled glances. Drinks rippled in their cups, and a few passengers tightened their grips on armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom almost immediately, smooth and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a small patch of rough air. Nothing unusual. Please keep your seatbelts fastened while we navigate through it. We'll be back to smooth flying shortly." The announcement did its job. The passengers relaxed, settling back into their seats. Nervous flyers exhaled, convinced that turbulence was the worst they would have to endure. The plane steadied, the shakes disappearing as quickly as they had come. Calm returned. But in the cockpit, calm was a performance. The captain and co-pilot exchanged glances, both knowing the turbulence wasn't what concerned them. The warning light had flickered again during the shake, brighter this time, almost insistent. "Pressure levels still off," the co-pilot muttered, running diagnostics again. "Fuel burn looks uneven too," the captain added, tapping the gauge with a frown. They worked in silence for a while, their fingers dancing across switches and buttons with the precision of men who had rehearsed these motions 1,000 times. To any observer, it would have looked like a choreographed dance, but beneath the rhythm, unease coiled tighter. The captain adjusted his headset, contacting air traffic control. His voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of the growing tension. He reported the readings, requested monitoring, and kept his tone measured. No need to alarm anyone, yet not the passengers, not the attendants, not even himself. In row 11, the passengers knew nothing of this. The businessman closed, his eyes drifting toward an uneasy nap. The mother glanced at her daughter, brushing her hand along the girl's forehead with tender affection. The students laughed too loudly again, earning another sharp look from the woman across the aisle. And there, still asleep, the woman in 1A became the strange center of calm. Her stillness contrasted so sharply with the undercurrent of unease that it seemed almost surreal. She was untouched by the turbulence, untouched by the chatter, untouched by the invisible thread of tension weaving its way through the aircraft. The calm stretched on, minutes blending into one another. Passengers shifted, attendants cleared. Trays' lights dimmed slightly as the plane crossed into another time zone. For most, this was just another flight, another stretch of waiting before arrival. But for those in the cockpit, it was becoming a countdown, an unanswered question, ticking louder with each passing mile. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the air carried a weight, invisible but undeniable. Something was coming. And in seat 1A, she slept, peaceful, unaware, as though the world around her had not yet decided to break. The cockpit was quiet but tense, lit by the glow of countless instruments. Screens glowed with green, yellow, and red indicators, casting faint light across the captain's stern face. To anyone outside, the night looked serene, stars scattered. Across the sky, the earth below blanketed in darkness, the aircraft gliding smoothly through invisible currents. But inside, the stillness was deceptive. Machines spoke in warnings, and the men at the controls were listening closely. The first flicker of trouble had been ignored, the second reluctantly acknowledged. By the third, it was impossible to dismiss. The light pulsed steadily now, drawing the captain's gaze again and again. He pressed his lips together, a muscle twitching at the corner of his jaw. "Check it again," he told the co-pilot. The younger man nodded, his fingers racing over buttons. Diagnostics rolled across the screen numbers that should have offered reassurance. but instead deepened the knot in his stomach. He frowned, leaning closer, as if squinting would alter the truth. "It's not a sensor error," he finally said, his voice lower than before. "The pressurization system is showing inconsistencies. Cabin pressure looks stable for now, but these readings don't match." The captain's eyes flicked across the dials, and back to the man beside him. "And the fuel consumption?" The co-pilot hesitated before answering. "Uneven. Engines are running fine, but the numbers are climbing too fast. If this is accurate, we're burning fuel quicker than we should." The cockpit fell silent. Again, except for the steady hum of the engines. The captain leaned back in his chair, his hand hovering near the throttle. Thousands of hours of flight experience pressed against his instincts. He had seen anomalies before. Most resolved themselves. But sometimes they didn't. And when they didn't, decisions made in these early moments decided everything. He toggled the radio, speaking calmly into his headset. "Control, this is Flight 237. We're seeing irregular pressure and fuel consumption. Requesting confirmation on readings." The reply crackled back after a pause, ground control's voice equally professional. "Copy that. Flight 237. We'll monitor. Advise if situation worsens." The exchange was short, clinical, designed to conceal urgency. But urgency was there, bubbling beneath the surface, like a current waiting to break through calm waters. Back in the cabin, no one knew. The world continued as if nothing was amiss. The businessman in 10C stirred from his nap, stretching stiff arms before opening his laptop again. The mother in 12B kissed the crown of her daughter's head, pulling the stuffed rabbit back into place. The students laughed at a joke one of them had scribbled on a napkin. A flight attendant rolled an empty cart back toward the galley, pausing to ask a passenger if they needed anything else. Her smile was convincing, her posture flawless. None of them knew what blinked insistently on the other side of the cockpit door. And yet, subtle signs began to emerge. The seatbelt sign flickered on again, though turbulence had long passed. Passengers exchanged questioning glances, but said little. Some tugged their belts tighter, others ignored it entirely. The attendants moved more briskly now, cleaning trays, checking overhead bins with an efficiency that carried an undercurrent of quiet tension. In row 11, she remained unchanged. The woman in 1-1, still slept soundly, her head pressed against the window, her blanket pulled snugly against her chin. Her stillness was almost eerie, as though she existed in a separate world untouched by the quiet unease creeping into the cabin. The captain turned to his co-pilot. "If the pressurization system fails, we won't have much time to react. Keep masks in mind." The co-pilot nodded grimly. "And the fuel?" The captain glanced at the numbers again, frowning. "We've got enough for New York if the readings are wrong. If they're right, we'll need to divert." For a long moment, both men stared at the blinking light, its rhythm steady, unyielding. Neither wanted to say it aloud, but both were thinking the same thing. What if this wasn't just a false alarm? The captain ran his hand across his chin, debating. There was a balance to be struck. Announced too soon, and panic could ripple through the cabin. Announced too late, and lives could be lost. Every choice bore weight, every second mattered. "Let's wait," he finally said. "Monitor everything. No announcements until we confirm." The co-pilot didn't argue, but his knuckles whitened against the edge of his clipboard. The minutes passed slowly, stretching longer than they should. The aircraft's steady hum filled the silence, but both men were listening for something else, anything out of place. A change in engine pitch, a fluctuation in altitude, a sign that the anomaly was tipping toward disaster. And then it came. The panel beeped sharply, not once, but in a stuttering sequence that pulled both men instantly forward. The co-pilot scanned the readings, his voice quick. Pressure fluctuation again. Small, but rising. Fuel burn rate is accelerating this. Isn't just a sensor issue. The captain tightened his grip on the controls. His heart beat steadily, but harder now, pressing against his ribs. He knew what this meant. Something real was happening, something that could not be ignored. He looked at his co-pilot, their eyes locking. For the first time that night, the illusion of calm broke. "This isn't nothing," the captain said. "No," the co-pilot replied quietly. "It's not." Back in the cabin, the passengers continued in blissful ignorance. A baby cried somewhere near the back, soothed by a parent's gentle rocking. Someone rang the attendant call button, asking for another blanket. Laughter erupted briefly from the students, drawing a shushing sound from a weary traveler. Only the attendants sensed the shift. They moved more briskly now, whispering briefly at the galley door before separating again with professional smiles. Passengers noticed the small changes, but brushed them aside. After all, wasn't flying always safe? But the tension was spreading invisibly, like cracks in glass. The air seemed thicker, the silence between conversations a little heavier. Some passengers began to glance toward the cockpit door, wondering why it stayed so firmly shut. In 11A, she slept through it all, her breathing deep and steady, her body at rest while the storm began to form around her. She did not know about the blinking light, the whispered calculations, the subtle changes in flight patterns. She did not see the way attendants glanced nervously at one another, or the way the captain pressed harder against the controls. For her, there was only sleep until the moment would come when sleep could no longer protect her. The discovery had been made. It was no longer a question of if there was a problem, but when it would make itself known to everyone else. And, in that heavy silence, the captain's thoughts hardened. Soon, he would have to make the announcement, but not yet. Not until he knew exactly what kind of storm they were flying into. The cockpit was silent, except for the hiss of oxygen and the relentless beeping of alarms. The captain's hands rested on the yoke, steady but tight, his knuckles pale against the dim glow of the instrument panel. Beside him, the co-pilot scrolled quickly through the checklist, muttering confirmations under his breath, like a chant against chaos. The warning light wouldn't go away. It glared at them, stubborn, insistent, painting the cockpit in shades of red no pilot wanted to see at 30,000 feet. Hydraulic pressure still dropping, the co-pilot said, his voice low but tense. The captain glanced at the gauges, then at the flight path ahead. They had time, but not much. Switch to backup system? The co-pilot moved swiftly, toggling controls, his hand brushing switches in a practiced blur. For a moment, the red light flickered as if considering mercy. Then it blazed again, brighter, crueler. The captain's jaw clenched. A decision was coming. The kind of decision they trained for, dreamed about, feared. "Captain," the co-pilot said softly, "we can't guarantee stability through descent. If we wait, we might lose control entirely." The captain didn't answer right away. He stared through the windshield at the endless black sky, broken only by a scattering of stars. The plane was a speck in that vastness, fragile as paper. Inside, hundreds of lives sat suspended between heaven and earth, blissfully unaware. For now the choice pressed against him like a weight on his chest. Tell them or don't. Alert the passengers or let them live in ignorance until the last possible moment. Both paths felt cruel. Both paths carried risk. He imagined them. Families with children, businessmen returning home, college students with earbuds, couples holding hands, strangers crammed together in the quiet intimacy of a night flight. Each of them was under his care. Each of them trusted him without knowing his name, his face, his doubts. "Captain," the co-pilot urged, eyes flicking toward him. "We have to say something. The crew has to prepare. If the hydraulics fail on landing, they need to know." The captain exhaled slowly, a sound heavy with resignation. He had been here before, not this exact crisis, but this exact moment, the brink of revelation. The instant before honesty pierced the fragile bubble of calm. "All right," he said. His voice was firm, though his stomach twisted. "Patch me through to the cabin." The co-pilot nodded, flicked a switch. The overhead speaker crackled faintly, waiting. The captain reached for the microphone, hesitated, then pulled it closer. He closed his eyes briefly, searching for words that could be both honest and steady. There was no script for this. Only instinct. He pressed the button. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice filled the cabin, calm but carrying an unmistakable gravity. "This is your captain speaking." The reaction was immediate. Conversations hushed, earbuds were pulled out, heads turned toward the ceiling speakers as if staring would make the words gentler. In row 11A, the woman did not stir. She slept on, oblivious, her cheek resting peacefully. Against the window, the captain continued. "We are experiencing a technical difficulty with one of our systems. We are in full control of the aircraft, but as a precaution, we will be diverting to the nearest available airport for an emergency. Landing." His tone was measured, clipped, designed to project control. But beneath the cadence, every passenger heard it, the strain, the shadow of desperation. It was the sound of truth pressing through the cracks. Gasps rose across the cabin. A child asked his mother, "What's wrong?" A man muttered, "Oh God." A woman pressed her hands together, whispering words that sounded like prayer. The captain continued, his voice steady even as the truth weighed on him. "Our crew is fully trained for situations like this. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and follow all instructions from the flight attendants. I ask you to stay calm. We will do everything in our power to bring you safely to the ground. Thank you." The line clicked off. The speakers fell silent. For a moment, so did the cabin. Then the noise came low, rising, unstoppable. Whispers, swelling into murmurs, murmurs sharpening into panic. Passengers turned to one another, eyes wide, voices cracking with questions no one could answer. What did technical difficulty mean? Why emergency landing? Were they going to die? The words rippled like electricity through the rows, sparking fear in every corner. Emma, standing at the front of the cabin, felt it like a wave. She had been through turbulence, diversions, medical emergencies. But this was different. She could see it in their faces. This was raw, primal fear. She forced her voice above the murmur. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. The captain and crew are trained for emergencies. Keep your seatbelts fastened. We will guide you through everything you need to do." Her tone was crisp, practiced, the voice of authority. But even she couldn't quiet the pounding in her chest. As she moved down the aisle, checking belts, checking trays, she caught fragments of conversations. They wouldn't tell us unless it was serious. "My kids, oh God, my kids. Is the plane going down?" Each word cut like glass. She fought to keep her expression neutral, soothing, professional. Inside, she was trembling. And yet 1A, Emma glanced toward the window seat. The woman still slept, face serene, chest rising and falling with even rhythm. Around her, chaos swirled, voices, sobs, panic, but she remained untouched, cocooned. In some unshakable slumber. Emma hesitated. Should she wake her? Would she even want to know? A strange part of her envied the woman. To be unaware, to be unburdened by the knowledge that now ate through the rest of them like fire. Was that a blessing or a curse? She moved on, unable to decide. Meanwhile, the captain leaned back in his chair, releasing the microphone. His throat felt dry, his chest hollow. He had done it. He had spoken the words. And though they had sounded controlled, steady, they had felt like confession. He glanced at the co-pilot, who gave a short nod. You did the right thing. They needed to know. The captain's eyes flicked toward the dark horizon. He thought of the hundreds of souls behind him, souls now awake to the truth, hearts hammering, imaginations racing. He had cracked the shell of ignorance. And now there was no turning back. In the cabin, tension thickened with every minute. Some passengers clutched each other tightly, whispering promises of love. Others stared blankly ahead, frozen. A man in the aisle seat gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles shone white. A teenager scrolled her phone, typing messages with frantic speed, her thumbs blurring as though each word might be her last dot, and through it all, 11A slept. The captain's decision had awakened everyone but her. A strange serenity of her rest became a silent question in the cabin, one that no one voiced, but many noticed. How could she not wake? How could she not feel it? The question would linger long after. But in that moment, what mattered most was this. The captain had spoken. The truth was out, and the cabin was forever changed. The journey ahead would test them all. And the woman in 1-1, still asleep, remained the greatest mystery of them all. The captain's words still hung in the cabin like smoke, heavy and impossible to escape. We are experiencing a critical issue and will need to attempt an emergency landing. For a split second, silence reigned. A kind of silence that feels unnatural, where time itself seems to pause. And then, as if on cue, the storm of human emotion broke loose. Gasps erupted, first sharp intakes of breath that carried the weight of disbelief. A woman clutched her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Somewhere behind row 20, a child whimpered, her thin voice slicing through the quiet before being hushed by trembling parents. The businessman in 10C muttered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse, it was hard to tell. The ripple of panic spread quickly, unstoppable. Whispered questions filled the air. What did he mean by critical? How bad is it? Are we going to crash? The flight attendants moved swiftly, their polished smiles slipping at the edges as they exchanged quick glances. Professional training kicked in. They had practiced this, drilled for this, but nothing could fully prepare them for the raw humanity erupting around them. One man fumbled for his phone, thumbing it awake despite airplane mode, trying desperately to send a message that would never go through. Another whispered into his hands, rocking slightly in his seat, lips moving in frantic prayer. A teenager buried her face in her hoodie, tears streaming silently. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary of routine. It had become a chamber of fear. Yet in the middle of it all, in 1-1A, she remained asleep, her head against the window, her breathing slow and steady, her face untouched by the chaos that surrounded her. If anyone noticed, they might have envied her, or perhaps been unsettled by her detachment. How could someone remain so calm, so utterly removed, when everyone else was staring into the jaws of uncertainty? The mother in 12B leaned forward, whispering urgently to the passenger across the aisle. Did he say landing? Emergency landing? Her voice cracked, but she tried to stay composed for her daughter, who stirred at the shift in tone. The stuffed rabbit slipped to the floor, and the little girl reached for it with sleepy confusion. Yes, the man answered, his own voice trembling. He said emergency. The word carried weight, passed from mouth to mouth, until it became a chant of dread. Emergency. Emergency. The flight attendants worked harder now, raising their voices just enough to cut through the panic. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Keep your seatbelts fastened. We are fully trained for this situation. The captain is in control. Their words were steady, but their eyes betrayed them. Passengers noticed the tension in their shoulders, the tightness of their smiles, the way their hands lingered on seatbacks a moment longer than necessary. The businessman in 10C slammed his laptop shut, muttering angrily, "I can't believe this. I knew I should have taken the train. I should have." His words trailed into incoherence as he rubbed his forehead, his voice cracking between anger and fear. Behind him, a young couple held each other tightly, their foreheads pressed together, whispering promises as if to anchor themselves. Nearby, an elderly woman crossed herself repeatedly, her lips murmuring prayers with the devotion of someone who had faced mortality before. The cabin felt smaller now, shrinking under the weight of dread. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the engines, the rustle of clothes, the occasional sob. The air itself seemed heavier, harder to breathe, as if the tension had filled every pocket of oxygen. And still, in 11A, she slept, unaware, detached, a living paradox in the middle of unraveling humanity. A teenager across the aisle noticed her and whispered to her mother, "Why isn't she freaking out? Look at her, she's asleep." The mother shook her head, eyes wide, unable to answer. Perhaps she envied that kind of oblivion, or perhaps it frightened her more than the announcement itself. The captain's voice returned briefly, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to remain seated with your belts fastened. We are diverting to the nearest airport. Our crew is fully prepared, and we are trained for situations like this." His words, though steady, didn't soothe the way he hoped. The reassurance fell flat against the wall of fear. People clung tighter to loved ones. Some whispered prayers louder. Others stared blankly, frozen in a state of disbelief. The attendants began moving through the aisles, checking seatbelts, stowing loose items, repeating instructions in voices that balanced authority with forced calm. Their presence anchored some passengers, but for others, it only confirmed the severity of the situation. Why would the attendants look so serious if this weren't life or death? In row 15, a man tried to stand, muttering about needing to use the restroom. A flight attendant pressed him gently back into his seat. "Please, sir, for your safety, stay seated." His face flushed with anger and fear, but he obeyed, gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned pale. The minutes dragged. Each second felt longer, stretched thin by anticipation. The plane dipped slightly, a change in altitude that drew gasps and clutched armrests. It was controlled, part of the captain's maneuver, but to those in the cabin, it felt like the beginning of the end. A baby wailed. A man sobbed openly. Another passenger whispered frantically into a voice memo, recording words he prayed would reach his family someday. And through it all, in 11A, she shifted slightly, adjusting her blanket, still untouched by the storm. Her serenity became haunting, almost unnatural. To those who noticed, it was as if she had stepped outside of time itself, as if her body had refused to join the collective fear that now bound every other soul on board. The mother in 12B, her voice shaking, leaned toward the sleeping woman. "Wake up," she whispered, almost pleading. But when the woman didn't stir, she turned back to her daughter, hugging her tightly, realizing that perhaps ignorance truly was a blessing. For the passengers of Flight 237, the announcement had changed everything. The future, once certain, now dangled in uncertainty. Every mile brought them closer to an unknown outcome. The only certainty was the pounding of their own hearts, the sweat on their palms, the prayers whispered into the stale air. Fear had taken root at 30,000 feet. And yet, in 11A, she dreamed on. The cabin crew had faced turbulence, unruly passengers, even medical emergencies before, but this was different. There was something about the captain's announcement, the sharp edge to his voice, beneath its calm tone, that had jolted every flight attendant into a new gear. Behind their professional masks, adrenaline surged. Training exercises replayed in their minds. The drills, the emergency scenarios, the endless reminders that panic was contagious and must never start with them. Passengers could lose control. Crew could not. That was the unspoken law. In the forward galley, Emma, the lead attendant, pressed a hand to the metal counter to steady herself. She was the picture of calm in front of passengers. But here, out of their line of sight, she allowed herself a single deep breath. Her heart was pounding. She looked at her colleagues, younger attendants, with wide eyes that betrayed the fear. They couldn't voice aloud. "Focus," she said firmly, her voice low but steady. "We know what to do. Secure the cabin. Check belts. Clear the aisles. No exceptions." The attendants nodded, their faces tightening into masks of composure. They moved quickly, scattering down the narrow aisle with purposeful strides. The cabin was a storm of humanity. Passengers clutched at attendants, voices rising with questions. "What's wrong? Are we safe? How bad is it?" The attendants answered with the same practiced lines. "The captain has everything under control. Please stay seated. Keep your belt fastened." But their voices betrayed a tension just sharp enough for the most observant passengers to detect. In row 14, a man grabbed an attendant's wrist. "Tell me the truth. Are we going to crash?" His voice cracked, his grip desperate. The attendant gently pried her hand free, forcing her smile to hold. "Sir, we are trained for these situations. The safest thing you can do is remain calm and buckled in." She moved on before he could push further, but his wide, fearful eyes followed her, unblinking. Meanwhile, Emma reached the front rows, scanning quickly. The businessman in 10C sat rigid, fingers interlocked, muttering something she couldn't hear. The mother in 12B was whispering into her daughter's ear, rocking gently as if her calm could shield the child from the fear infecting the cabin. And then there was 11A. The woman slept, still, peaceful, untouched. Emma paused for half a second, staring. In all her years of flying, she had seen every reaction to turbulence, to delays, to emergencies. But never this. Never someone so removed, so unreachable. She wanted to shake her awake, to explain, to warn. But then again, maybe sleep was mercy. Maybe she was the luckiest soul on board. Emma turned away, forcing her thoughts back to duty. Behind the locked cockpit door, another storm raged. The captain's hands moved with surgical precision across the controls, his mind cataloging every detail. Fuel burn was accelerating beyond expectation. The pressure readings were inconsistent, spiking one moment, flattening the next. Altitude adjustments made little difference. He communicated with ground control in clipped sentences, reporting data, requesting instructions, weighing options. The co-pilot's voice was faster, sharper. "We need to commit. Cleveland is the nearest option. If the readings keep climbing, we won't make New York." The captain nodded once, his jaw hard. "Set course for Cleveland. Alert them." The co-pilot relayed the diversion, his hands steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. He scribbled notes on a clipboard, the numbers blurring as he recalculated. Fuel reserves, distance, descent rate. Each figure was a piece of a puzzle whose solution determined life or death. Inside the cockpit, the air was heavy with unspoken truths. They knew they had control for now, but they also knew control was fragile. One more fluctuation, one more unexpected failure, and their margin for survival would narrow to nothing. "Cabin secure?" the captain asked. Emma's voice crackled through the interphone. "Passengers are belted. Crew is running checks. We are ready." "Good," the captain said, though the word felt hollow. In the cabin, Emma and her team moved with relentless purpose. They stowed trays, tucked bags more firmly under seats, reminded passengers to keep electronics away. Their voices were calm, measured, but every instruction carried weight. Some passengers obeyed quietly, their fear bottled into silence. Others resisted, panic pushing them into irrationality. A man stood halfway down the aisle, shaking his head. "I'm not sitting down. I want answers." Emma approached him calmly, her voice firm but respectful. "Sir, you need to take your seat immediately, for your safety and everyone else's." He resisted at first, muttering about lawsuits, about incompetence, about fear. But the weight of dozens of eyes, the sharp authority in Emma's gaze, eventually pulled him back into his seat. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the buckle. Everywhere she looked, Emma saw fear manifesting differently. Some passengers clutched religious tokens, rosaries glinting in the dim light. Others wrote frantically in notebooks, leaving messages that might never be read. Some whispered apologies, others promises, as if words could shield them from what might come. And yet, there was still one Emma checked again as she passed. The woman remained asleep, her lips parted slightly, her breathing soft and steady. She hadn't stirred once through the captain's announcement, through the chaos, through the frantic energy that had consumed the plane. Her stillness became a strange anchor, almost eerie in its defiance of fear. Nearby passengers noticed too. A teenager whispered to his mother, "Why isn't she awake? Doesn't she hear any of this?" The mother just shook her head, her eyes darting back to the cockpit door. The pressure of leadership bore down heavily on Emma. She couldn't show fear. She couldn't crack. She had to be the steady hand in the storm, even if her own heart screamed otherwise. Every second demanded composure. Every second tested her resolve. In the cockpit, the captain's voice came again, softer this time, meant only for his co-pilot. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before these numbers become critical." The co-pilot swallowed hard. "Plenty of time if nothing else fails. And if something does?" The silence that followed said everything. Back in the cabin, Emma reached for the intercom, her thumb hesitating before she pressed it. Her voice filled the cabin once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are prepared and following all emergency procedures. For your safety, we need you seated with belts fastened at all times. Trust that your crew and captain are in full control." Her voice was steady, convincing. Passengers clung to it, some believing, some only pretending to believe. But for a moment, the ripple of panic softened. The crew moved back to their jump seats, buckling in, their eyes darting between the passengers and the silent, locked cockpit door. The pressure was immense, and it was only just beginning. In 11A, she turned slightly, her head leaning against the glass at a new angle. A faint smile touched her lips, as if her dreams knew nothing of the world unraveling around her. To the others, her calm was unthinkable. To Emma, it was haunting. And in the cockpit, the captain whispered what none of the passengers could hear. "We're running out of time." The captain's voice came through the speakers again, lower, graver, clipped with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are beginning an emergency descent. Please remain seated with your belts securely fastened. Follow the instructions of your crew. We are diverting to the nearest airport. Stay calm. We are prepared for this." The words emergency descent struck the cabin like a physical blow. A ripple of gasps, shouts, and muffled sobs spread instantly. Then came the mechanical groan as the plane's nose angled downward, engines shifting pitch. The aircraft began its rapid fall from 30,000 feet. The descent was not gentle. Gravity pulled against every passenger, pressing them into their seats, forcing the air from their lungs. Drinks toppled from tray tables, bags shifted beneath seats, and loose belongings skittered down the aisle. Some passengers screamed. Others clasped hands, knuckles white, whispering desperate prayers. The mother in row 12 held her child so tightly. The little girl whimpered, but her arms never loosened. The businessman in 10C muttered numbers under his breath, stock prices, equations, fragments of spreadsheets, his mind clinging to the familiar in a futile attempt to drown out the terror. And then there was 11A. She did not stir. Not when the plane tilted, not when screams rang out, not when the engines roared like thunder in her ears. Her head lolled gently against the window, lips parted slightly in the same steady rhythm of sleep. The descent was fast. Too fast. Some passengers reached for the oxygen masks as if expecting them to drop, though the pressure in the cabin held for now. The attendants, strapped into their jump seats, exchanged looks that spoke volumes. They could not move, could not comfort, could not ease the fear. They were strapped in as powerless as the rest, their training reduced to stillness in the face of gravity's grip. Emma, the lead attendant, fought to keep her breathing steady. The force of descent pressed against her chest, making her heartbeat pound like a war drum. She scanned the rows automatically, her eyes darting over panicked faces, trembling hands, wide, desperate eyes. Her gaze landed again on 11A. The woman's serenity gnawed at her more now than ever. How could she sleep through this? Through what felt like the very end of the world? Emma wanted to cry out, to shake her awake, to make her share in the reality around her. But perhaps, Emma thought bitterly, she was the lucky one. Inside the cockpit, the descent was a dance of precision and control. The captain's voice was calm, but his hands were a blur of motion, guiding the aircraft into its controlled fall. Alarms buzzed intermittently, warnings blinking like angry eyes across the instrument panel. Rate of descent steady, the co-pilot said, his voice taut. Altitude falling 25,000, 20,000. Keep it smooth, the captain muttered, though smooth was relative. Every bump of turbulence rattled the fuselage like a child's toy shaken in a hand. The metal body of the aircraft groaned with the strain. The co-pilot wiped a bead of sweat from his temple, never once taking his eyes from the instruments. He felt the weight of lives behind him, the hundreds of souls clinging to their seats, relying on the two men in the cockpit to thread a steel bird through the sky toward safety. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to something rawer, deeper. Some passengers cried openly, shoulders heaving with sobs. Others sat eerily still, stunned into silence, their minds paralyzed by fear. Couples clutched hands. Strangers leaned toward one another, whispering last words, final prayers. The teenager. In 17A scribbled frantically in a notebook, tears smudging the ink. The words were disjointed messages to friends, apologies to his parents, declarations of love he had never spoken aloud. He folded the page and tucked it into the seatback pocket, as though believing it might be found, that his voice might survive even if he did not. A man 2 rows ahead recorded a video on his phone. His voice shook as he spoke. If anyone finds this, tell my family I love them. We're descending hard. I don't know if we'll make it. His words cut off as the plane jolted violently, his phone slipping from his grip. Emma watched it all, every detail, every small act of humanity clawing against fear. She memorized their faces, their desperate clutches at faith, their trembling mouths forming words meant for loved ones far below. It was both heartbreaking and profoundly beautiful, the raw honesty of people facing mortality together in a metal tube hurtling downward. The plane bucked suddenly, a pocket of turbulence slamming it sideways. Screams erupted again. The overhead bins rattled furiously, one snapping open with a violent crack. A bag spilled out, striking a passenger's shoulder. The man cried out in pain, clutching at the bruise. Emma's knuckles whitened, as she gripped her harness. She wanted to run to him, to help, but she could not. None of them could. All she could do was lock eyes with him and mouth the words, "It's okay. Hold on." But even as she mouthed them, she wasn't sure she believed them herself. Minutes dragged like hours. Each second felt stretched to its breaking point. The descent continued relentlessly. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. The captain's steady voice returned to the intercom, announcing their progress, urging calm, repeating instructions. But his words washed over the passengers, like waves crashing against stone. Few could even hear him through the pounding in their own ears. And still, 11A slept. By now, whispers had spread. People pointed, incredulous. How could she be sleeping? What kind of person slept through the possibility of death? Was she sedated? Unwell? Or was it something stranger? Something no one could explain? To Emma, the sight had taken on a surreal, almost haunting edge. The woman's calm was a rebuke, a mirror to the chaos around her. It was as though she existed in another reality, untouched by fear, by gravity, by death's looming shadow. Finally, the pressure in the cabin began to ease as the descent slowed. The aircraft leveled at a lower altitude, the engines shifting again as the roar softened. The captain's voice came once more, steadier now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are stable at a safe altitude. We are continuing toward Cleveland for an emergency landing. Please remain seated, belts fastened, and trust your crew. We are in control." The words brought a flood of relief, small, fragile, but enough. Sobs of terror shifted into sobs of gratitude. Hands unclenched slightly. A few passengers even clapped weakly, as though applauding the survival of the descent. Emma exhaled shakily, her chest aching from holding her breath for so long. The other attendants exchanged weary glances, silent acknowledgments of what they had just endured. But Emma's eyes drifted back once more, inevitably, to one eye. The woman stirred faintly, shifting her head, but did not wake. Her serenity remained unbroken. In a cabin of hearts still hammering with fear, she remained the only one untouched. It was almost unbearable. For Emma, it was the cruelest contrast of all. The descent was over. The danger was not. The hardest part landing still lay ahead. But for now, the crew and passengers had survived. For now. The announcement of stabilization at a safe altitude should have been comforting, yet the cabin remained taut with unease. Fear didn't vanish with a few words from the captain. It lingered like a shadow in every trembling hand, every wide and glistening eye. The passengers had survived the descent, but they knew instinctively what came next: the landing. Landing, under normal circumstances, was routine. But in an emergency, it was the crucible. It was where the margin of error shrank to nearly nothing. Every soul on board understood, though none dared voice it, survival was not guaranteed. The captain's voice returned, steadier now, but edged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are on approach to Cleveland Hopkins International. We will be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened tightly. Crew, prepare the cabin for landing." The flight attendants unstrapped themselves, legs unsteady as they rose, for what could be their final round through the cabin. Emma led them, her face composed, her movements efficient, though her heart drummed mercilessly beneath her uniform. She checked seatbelts, trays, loose belongings. She reassured when she could, offering calm words and practiced smiles, though. She could see the hollowness in the passengers' eyes. No one truly believed reassurance now. They only clung to it, fragile as a matchstick flame in a storm. When Emma reached row 11, her eyes again lingered on the woman in 1A, still asleep, still utterly detached from the terror around her. Emma leaned closer, her hand hesitating inches from the woman's shoulder. Should she wake her? Shouldn't she? But then, what would be the point? The thought came bitterly. If she can sleep through all of this, let her have it. Emma moved on, swallowing the knot in her throat. The final descent began. The plane tilted again, lower, lower, the lights of the city sprawling beneath them like a glittering net. Passengers craned their necks to see, but their awe was drowned by dread. Each flicker of light below was not beauty, but reminder Earth, rising fast, steel and glass, waiting to meet them. Inside the cockpit, the tension was surgical. The captain's hands were steady on the yoke, though sweat dampened his brow. His co-pilot read out altitude, speed, headings, their voices clipped. Efficient. No room for hesitation. No room for mistakes. Runway in sight, the co-pilot confirmed. Gear down, the captain ordered. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk, the aircraft shuddering as though bracing itself. Back in the cabin, the sound drew fresh gasps. A child whimpered. Someone whispered, "This is it." The runway lights grew nearer, stretching out like a glowing path into the night. The engines roared, then softened as the captain adjusted their thrust. The descent was measured, practiced, but to those inside, it felt like a free fall into fate. Emma gripped the back of a seat as she steadied herself in the aisle. Her lips moved silently, repeating the same words over and over. Not procedure, not training. A prayer. The final seconds stretched into eternity. The ground rushed up to meet them. The passengers braced, hands gripping armrests, shoulders rigid, eyes shut tight. And then impact. The wheels struck the runway with a bone-jarring slam. The entire fuselage rattling as sparks of friction screamed from below. The plane bounced once, twice, then steadied, the engines reversing in a deafening roar. Bodies lurched forward, held back only by belts biting into waists. Luggage shifted overhead, rattling against the bins. Screams mingled with the roar of deceleration. For a moment, it felt as if the aircraft would careen out of control. But the captain's hands held firm. The brakes engaged. Slowly, agonizingly, the screech of metal gave way to a dull, grinding rumble. The speed bled away, and then stillness. The aircraft rolled to a slow final halt on the runway. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. No one dared believe it. Then came the eruption. Applause, sobs, cheers, cries of disbelief. Strangers embraced as though bound by blood. A man kissed the floor. A child shouted, "We're alive," in a voice so pure it shattered hearts. Emma's chest heaved as she clung to the nearest seat, eyes stinging with tears she had fought all night to suppress. Around her, the cabin vibrated with the raw sound of survival. And then she remembered. 1-1A. She turned, half in disbelief, half in morbid curiosity. The woman stirred, as though finally woken not by descent, not by chaos, not by landing, but by applause. Her eyelids fluttered open lazily, unfocused at first, then settling into a quiet awareness. She stretched faintly, blinked at the jubilant chaos around her, and frowned in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked softly, her voice carrying oddly in the exhausted cabin. Emma stared at her, words trapped in her throat. The woman had slept through it all. The panic, the prayers, the descent, the landing, the brush with mortality itself. The passengers nearest to her turned, some with incredulous laughter, others with almost accusatory stares. One man barked out, "We nearly died. That's what happened." His voice cracked with leftover terror. But 1-1A only blinked again, lips parting in a small "oh," before she leaned back casually, adjusting her sweater as though waking from a nap at home. The surrealness of it silenced even the most hysterical. She was untouched and touched by the storm of human fear that had swept through every other heart in that cabin. For Emma, the sight was unbearable. She turned away, focusing instead on her crew's duties, preparing for evacuation, guiding passengers, calming the flood of adrenaline-fueled energy that pulsed through the aisles. The cabin doors opened at last. The smell of fuel and tarmac wafted in, mixed with the cool night air. Emergency vehicles flanked the aircraft, lights flashing red and blue, sirens muted now in acknowledgement of survival rather than disaster. Passengers filed out, some stumbling, some weeping, others still dazed as though caught in a dream. Each one touched the ground with reverence, some even dropping to their knees in gratitude. Emma stayed at her post, directing them, her voice steady despite her own trembling hands. She watched them go, every face etched into her memory faces. That had lived through something extraordinary, something terrifying, something unifying. And then, near the end, came one eye. She moved unhurriedly, stepping into the aisle with a serene composure that bordered on arrogance. Her eyes swept casually across the wreckage of emotion around her. The tear-streaked cheeks, the disheveled clothes, the trembling hands. Her lips curved faintly, though whether in sympathy or dismissal, Emma could not tell. When she stepped onto the tarmac, the night air kissed her skin. She inhaled deeply, smiled faintly, and walked forward as though nothing at all had happened. Emma watched her go, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Relief, anger, awe, it all mixed together until it became a knot of unsolvable mystery. How could someone sleep through near death? How could someone remain untouched by the rawest edges of human fear? Emma would never know. The official reports would tell a story of mechanical failure narrowly avoided, of skilled pilots bringing hundreds safely to Earth. The headlines would speak of terror in the sky, of prayers and panic. But Emma knew another story. The story of a woman in 11A who had slept through it all. And she knew it was a story no one would ever forget. Not her, not the passengers, not the crew. Somewhere in the cacophony of survival, in the sobbing and laughter and embraces, a question lingered, unspoken yet eternal. What does it mean to sleep through the end of the world? The answer would never come, but the memory would never leave.